Hello everyone and welcome to this second video on Ozymandias where we're going to look really closely at the structure. I'm going to start off with the fact that this is a 14-line poem. They are called sonnets. Traditionally they're love poems and often love complaints, and clearly Shelley is already and instantly and immediately rejecting that. Now if we go a little bit further, sonnets and the two that you need to be aware of really and most usefully, we have the Petrarchan Sonnet, and that organises the sonnet in a particular way. What you get is a stanza of 4 lines, a stanza of 4 lines, so that gives you an octet, followed by 2 stanzas of 3 lines each, so 8 lines, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and that's called the sestet. And you would normally then get a break here with a volta, which just means turn. A change, a sudden shift in the poem. Equally, the other type of sonnet that's worth being aware of is the Shakespearean sonnet. Surprisingly enough, pioneered by William Shakespeare in his sonnet sequence. And instead, what he does is he leaves the volta or the turn to between lines 12 and 13. So he has a very late volta instead. But here we have a different volta position. So we should expect it between lines 8 or 9, lines 12 and 13. So let's have a little look through this poem. Let's number the lines off so we can see it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14. So, I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions red which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, king of kings, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Then nothing beside remains, round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. So instead, Shelley puts the volta here. So we have the overview of what it looks like to the traveller, and then we have Ozymandias' words, and then we have the word nothing. So this is where our turn is. So our volta is placed in an unusual position. Okay, so Shelley defies tradition. Shelley is rejecting tradition in a really strong way. Now, traditional poetic structures probably would be associated with power and traditional forms of power. And Shelley's poem itself is therefore structurally a rebellion against power. He is rejecting the traditional forms of the sonnet. He is refusing to accept the traditional form of the sonnet. He's using a poetic form that should be for love poetry, traditionally for love poetry. Here, it's to discuss the nature of power. We should have a break between, as we have up here, the 8th and the 9th lines, or between lines 12 and 13 in the Shakespearean sonnet. Here it's between lines 11 and 12. So he is rejecting those power structures. And he's potentially also showing, because the first word following the volta is nothing, and I'll just highlight that really strongly for you here, that these power structures crumble and fall. That all power structures crumble and fall. That all power structures fail. So not only is his poetic form an act of rebellion, but he's also showing that all power structures, all poetic structures and forms, anything traditional is unstable, it will fail and fall. And in that sense, it's an inherently rebellious poem. So that allows you to comment on what Shelley wants to say about the nature of power, that power is mutable, power changes, power falls. But it's also Shelley's act of rebellion. Shelley is rejecting and rebelling against traditional poetic forms, like the sonnet, like the Petrarchan and the Shakespearean sonnet. And we can now move on and we can take our analysis and exploration of structure a little bit further. And one thing that students often struggle to comment on is lineation. Okay, and there are three features of lineation, and let's deal with these very explicitly here. We have caesura, and that is a break in the line. We don't discuss punctuation in poetry, we discuss lineation. And I'll show you what some of these look like, and I'll colour code them so you can see them really easily. We have an end stop. So that is a stop or a period piece of punctuation, a full stop piece of punctuation at the end of the line. And we have enjambment, where there is no stop at the end of the line. So let's start going through and let's just start having a look at what some of this looks like. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, well, there's a caesura. This ellipsis, this break is a caesura. There's one, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. You can see that actually many of the lines of this poem use caesura. And the comment that I will be making about this, because it's fine to identify, but we need to associate it with meaning, is that these are tools to fragment. So you wouldn't talk about the whole poem, you'd hone in on a quotation, so stand in the desert, near them on the sand, and we have these two caesura. So here, the caesuras fragment and break the line. Okay? And actually that reflects the way the statue has crumbled and the way power structures have crumbled. Let's look at another one. Let's see this one here, which yet survives, stamped on those lifeless things. This one works slightly differently. So we have another caesura here. And we have on either side of caesura the words survive and stamped. So here the caesura separates the lexis, word choice, survive and stamped. And they place them in balance and opposition to one another. We have that survival, living, continuing, and that word stamping. So we have life versus restraint. The freedom to live the life that you want, versus the restraint being imposed by dictators such as Ozymandias. And that is an idea reinforced and stressed through the caesura. So that gives us a starting point. Now, the next thing to look at, and that we'll look at next, is the end stop. So I'll just change the colour. And we're just going to focus on one in particular. Here we have an end stop really clearly. Just at the end of the line here. That's a period piece of punctuation, it's got a full stop in it, and we halt the line. Now, it shouldn't escape your notice that this works with the volta as well. So we have this absolute stop at this moment of the poem. So let's just zoom in right here. So we have the end stop. We are halting the voice of Ozymandias, and he is silenced. Okay, he has no voice anymore. And again, that stresses the way power is lost. but then the end stop moves us to nothing. So it's a nice way and a powerful way to reinforce that all tyrannical voices are reduced to nothing. All tyrannical voices are negated eventually. So there we have a nice example where actually end stop has this very powerful impact and helps to reinforce and stress a range of meaning. Now on to enjambment, and this one is really easy to be really loose and vague about, but let's look at it here. We have across this line, tell that its sculptor well on line 6, well those passions read which yet survive. So there's no punctuation here. And what this does, enjambment, normally, is it continues meaning. And that's really important to understand because end stop and caesura fragment or stop or halt or pause. They break things apart, they separate ideas. Enjambment continues meaning. So then we have to look at the line and we need to work out what meaning is carrying on. So it's the sculptor whose passions read which yet survive. So what's being continued here? Well, the sculptor worked out and was able to show the cruelty of Ozymandias, and those go on to survive. And actually, that's interesting. That's the point that's happening here. So the enjambment is suggestive of the way the cruelty is the lasting, indelible impression. So that's what carries through. That's what carries through history. That's the lasting final impression. It's not power that is the final impression. It's the cruelty of the tyrant which survives. And that is really interesting. And it probably then plays on to the idea down here where we have that separation, the lexis survive and stamped. Yes, the cruelty survives. Yes, the cruelty continues on. But it's also reduced, it's also restrained, it's also destroyed, but by time and by history instead of by the dictator. So that gives you a flavour for some of the structural devices that happen in this poem. But what about the language? What about the language in particular? Well, let's take some of that and let's start looking at it a little bit more closely. So we'll just stop for a moment and we'll just look at the last line and a half of the poem. So we'll just write that up, and I think we'll just start here, okay? So we'll look at the quotation, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Pop our quotation marks around it. And now we can start working on this quotation. So as you would normally when you're analysing a quotation, we start off by just selecting the lexis. So we have boundless, bare, lone, keywords, and I think I'll take that word stretch as well. Then we want to start adding some features, which I'll do in red. So overall, I think this desert is a symbol. Symbol being an image with multiple possible connotations and meanings. And we have the enjambment here. And we also have the plosive B's. And we have these sibilant sounds that run across these lines as well. So, what do we do with this then? Let's start off with our key words and let's just hone in. So that word boundless, it's limitless. Perpetual, perpetual just means carries on forever. Maybe inescapable. And this is Shelley saying or asserting that you can't escape history, or that power always is fleeting, power is temporary. Let's go to that word bear next. Well, this is a word that's empty, emptiness, nothingness. The result of negation, that nothing is left. The word bear for me has this suggestion of lifelessness as well. And so the outcome of tyranny, as far as Shelley is concerned, is destructive. You could even go so far as to say apocalyptic. But he's also showing that tyrants fail. We move on to that word lone. Well, lone means lonely, to be alone. It's a single figure. It's isolated. So here we have Shelley commenting on the way that dictators are often isolated. And from that isolation comes weakness and vulnerability. And finally, this lexical choice, word choice, the word stretch. And I think that this desert continues endlessly. That there is no end, but also possibly there will be no restoration of this dictator. But equally and alternatively, that there is no sense that the damage can be repaired. So there's our lexical choices explored. Now let's start working through our features. So we can look at the symbol of the desert. Deserts are made up of sand. I know that's the statement of the blindingly obvious, but that lets us do something more interesting. Sand are just fragments. So all power is reduced to fragments. Let me just zoom out. We have these plosive bees, boundless and bare. We have this harsh and aggressive sound. Plosive sounds are destructive, and they add that sense that everything has been reduced to nothing. However, then we have these sibilant S sounds, boundless and bare, the loner level sands stretch far away. So this sibilance is a quiet sound. It's the silence that's left over, and perhaps reinforces that after destruction, nothing remains. Equally, that the voice of Ozymandias, this arrogant, vain voice of Ozymandias, has been silenced forever. And then finally, just looking at another example of enjambment, boundless and bare, the loner level sounds stretch far away. Well, it's this bareness that carries on, because we always think with enjambment what meaning is being carried through. So the bareness is carried on. This makes the emptiness seem perpetual, continual and constant. So, now you've watched these two videos, what do you do next? Well, off the back of these two videos, you should add your own interpretations and consider very carefully what Shelley wants to say about power and the nature of history, and then select your own quotations like I've done in this final part of the video, and analyse them in detail. And I'd recommend having, as ever, about 4 quotations that you've explored closely like this. Good luck, everyone, and I look forward to seeing some of the work that you produce.